Hello and welcome into episode 26 of Preps to Pros. I'm Cooper Petagna alongside Andrew Ivins, and we got a great show planned for you today. The top 247 receives a facelift, Drew, so a lot going on. We'll get to some juice. We'll break down everything in the top 247, and that has to do with Arch Manning staying at the top. We'll also break down some of the top risers as well in the top 32, into the top 500. We'll talk about some guys that could potentially reach five-star status. We'll also get into some long shots, numbers 180 through 247. Who are some guys that could potentially outperform their current grade projection? And then we'll get into some debate as well with a couple of guys from the state of Florida. And we'll wrap up with a 2-minute drill. So we got a loaded show for you today. And when we started this show, the idea of it, Drew, was it was going to get into the nitty-gritty of the rankings. And I know me and you have a lot of daily conversation about who should be where. Now all of that culminates today, buddy. But another rankings release day. It's one of our favorite times of the year, Drew. And it's a good day to get started, my friend. I'm looking forward to getting into it with you today.
Absolutely. This is what people care about. And I'll say this because I've already had plenty of phone calls and text messages. I mean, there's still some time to go before these rankings in the class of 2023 go final. We got senior seasons coming up. We got the all-important all-star games. I think people are realizing how important those are. Remember, we talked about Evan Stewart last week. So still some time to go, but it's good to kind of get through that first senior cut and try to stack these guys and get it right, more importantly.
All right, Drew. So before we jump into the top 247, we got some juice today. Didn't have any juice on Monday. We knew it was kind of going to be a newsworthy day on Wednesday today. And let's get right to it. The Florida Gators, the number 11 class in the country right now. They got a big game this weekend in Gainesville as they host LSU, but it could be a busy day for them tomorrow. Drew, what's shaking with Billy Napier and the Florida Gators?
Yeah, Florida, they could have two commitments, pick up two commitments before that kickoff against LSU on Saturday. Bryce Thornton, a 3-star safety out of the Atlanta area, he's set to announce a decision on Thursday afternoon. By all accounts, Florida is in the driver's seat there for him, and he's a talented guy on the back seven that can come up in the box and play around. Corey Raymond, the defensive backs coach there, really likes him. And then I think the other guy that things are turning in the right direction for is Cooper, one of our favorites, Dejon Mustard Johnson, the former Ohio State commit. Remember, he decommitted back during the summer months, has been a regular at UF, got linked a little bit to the University of Miami, but never made it down to Coral Gables for a visit. Believe he's posting a video around 7 Eastern on Thursday, and I think Florida's going to get both these guys. And man, if they do, what an elite defensive back haul for Corey Raymond, the ace recruiter. You'd be adding those two to a group that already includes Jakeem Jackson, who's a riser in our rankings, Jordan Castile, a safety that kind of reminds me of Amari Burney for all the Florida fans out there. You got Sharif Denson, who I think is an ideal nickel inside corner, and then Aaron Gates, who's been committed to Florida for well over a year now and is a holdover from that previous staff. So good news on the way for the Florida Gators. I like them for Bryce, and I like them for Mustard. And that's the name of the game, the SEC. You got to slow down those passing attacks.
Florida is shaping up for a big Thursday. But, Drew, let's stick with top 247 cornerback Jakeem Jackson, currently committed to the Florida Gators. But he has an unofficial visit set up to Lexington this weekend to go see Kentucky, where his brother is also on the track and field team. What's the latest with him?
Well, you just stole my juice from me. That's the big nugget. I don't think a lot of people realize this. Jakeem Jackson, he's actually taking an official visit this weekend to Lexington. He'll be there for Kentucky's big game against Mississippi State, 2 ranked teams. And Jakeem, he was quick to point out to me on Monday night, Kentucky is the first school that offered me a scholarship. I feel like I owe it to those guys to go and listen to what they have to say and check out a game day environment. So I think Florida is going to be pretty hard to beat in this recruitment. But if there's one school to keep an eye on, it is Kentucky. And that's because his brother is there in Lexington. I mean, heck, they could be roommates. So something definitely to monitor. My brother went to the same college as me, and it sounds like those two guys are close. So Florida, I think that not a panic meter, but something to keep an eye on and track down the stretch. Who knows what the environment's going to be like this weekend in Lexington.
that will be an official visit for Jakeem Jackson to Lexington. We'll keep an eye on that one. And Drew, that's a guy that you like recently, as of today, big bump for him in the top 247. But Drew, we're going to stay in the Sunshine State, and we're going to go to Central Florida in one of their top prospects in this class in the 2023 cycle for Gus Malzahn. That is John Walker, defensive lineman out of Osceola, and a guy that has been pursued by Florida and by Miami. And as to date, that doesn't look like things have changed on that front.
Right. John Walker, he shocked many back in July when he picked UCF over Ohio State. Michigan was in there. Florida, like you mentioned, Miami was in there. But he has stuck with the Knights, who, by the way, have the nation's #1 ranked red zone defense right now. And when I was talking to John on Monday night, he made sure to point that out. So I'm sure the UCF Knights have been flooding his inbox with those graphics. Here's the situation. John has been to a ton of UCF games, and he's also been to a ton of Florida games. Gainesville's about a 90-minute drive from Orlando, depending on if you hit traffic or whatnot on 75. And John, I think he likes the Gators. He still has an official visit to use. Sounds like there's a possibility, but man, UCF is doing an excellent job of selling John Walker on the idea of staying home for school. So I like UCF for now, but keep an eye on Florida on that one. And I think he could be there this weekend for that LSU game.
We're going to talk about John Walker a little bit later in the show, but we're going to round out the juice with a guy that we like to talk about on this show. That is top 247 defensive lineman Reuben Bain. And Drew, kind of talking to you pre-production about Reuben Bain and his recruitment. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster. Auburn now surging in his recruitment. Louisville and Alabama also in the mix as well. What's the latest update with Reuben Bain?
They are. Auburn is the Tigers. Brian Harsin, his future might be in question. Who knows if he's going to have a job come Monday after they play Ole Miss. But Auburn is what I keep hearing for Reuben Bain, who has some ties to Miami. It seems like we always talk about that. He was in Miami Gardens at Hard Rock Stadium this past weekend for Miami's loss to North Carolina. I texted Reuben Bain this morning. He said he's going to release the top group of schools soon. I'm not going to share who that is, but Miami's one of them that's going to make it. Auburn's going to make it. Florida State, where he visits this weekend, they're going to make it. And then Alabama and Louisville are two others to keep an eye on. Reuben told me he's probably going to return to Louisville for a game. He hasn't set up an official visit yet. And then he's going to get back to Alabama possibly for 2 games, not just 1. So I still think, Miami's probably the favorite. I've said in the past that I think Alabama is the one to watch out for. They're the ones that could pull them out of the 305. But it seems like he really, really likes the Plains, what he has seen at Auburn. He likes Rock Bellantoni, the defensive ends coach there. So who knows? I mean, Harsin stays. Maybe that helps Auburn cases. Maybe Bellantoni gets retained by the new staff, and that helps them even more. But interesting development with Reuben Bain.
One of the more interesting recruitments there out of South Florida, Reuben Bain, certainly a guy that has risen in the rankings and certainly continues to trend up. But there you have it, the juice with Andrew Ivins bringing the goods today. And before we get into the top 247, remember, subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Leave us a like and a comment. That always helps with the algorithm right there. But Drew, let's get into it. And let's start at the top. The #1 player in the country maintaining his status atop. That is Arch Manning from Isidore Newman High School in Louisiana. A lot has been made about Arch Manning, certainly the level of competition that he faces. Drew, I got to go down and see him earlier this year against one of the teams that they faced earlier in the season in Riverside Academy. So Arch Manning 5-1 on the season, 60% completion rate. Right now, 22 touchdowns, 1 interception. And us, even in behind the scenes in the rankings meeting, this didn't really come as a shock, but I think we expected this to be a little bit more open-ended than it ended up being. The way Arch Manning has played this year, I think he's elevated not only himself, but has shown to elevate the talent around him. Newman sitting at 5-1, like I said, with wins against multiple teams above 500. Drew, what have you seen so far this year from Arch Manning, and how do you feel about Arch Manning holding on to the #1 player in the country?
Well, I'm going to say this about Arch. I think there's a lot of people that want Arch Manning to fail, right? Is there a high schooler under more pressure in the class of 2023. He has a target on his back. He checks social media. Everyone's pointing out who he's going up against. And you know what? Arch Manning can't control that. And Cooper, you said this a few months ago. And hey, this guy's doing what he's supposed to. I mean, if he goes 20 of 23 and 3 of them are drops, what do you want him to do? I mean, he's playing the schedule that he has and he's producing it, and he looks great doing it. I think his frame is what really stands out to me. I mean, Cooper, when you were there at that game getting that live exposure, didn't you seem to feel like he was a leader and he kind of had a little bit of an it to it? I think a lot of people don't realize that because Arch has been so reserved. I mean, heck, he's only made one tweet in his life, and that was announcing the commitment to Texas.
I think he has more of that to him than people really recognize in terms of kind of maybe that it factor, that competitive nature that he has. And certainly to me, where he's impressed the most when you watch him, I think he gets looped in naturally from a lot of people that really don't watch his game, but make a lot of assumptions, and they want to compare him to his uncles. I think that's only natural to do, but at 6'4", 215 pounds plus, this is a guy who's very athletic in the pocket, being able to extend plays. And to me, that's where he's the most comfortable. And they run very similar to offense to what Steve Sarkisian is running in Austin at the University of Texas. So in terms of him acclimating at the next level, the things that stand out amongst his game that have really separated him in the process are his ability to anticipate, the timing, the accuracy. That's what we've seen this year. And then to be able to take care of the football, only one interception. We mentioned that. They've had a couple games this season, a second half comeback against Benton earlier this year, where they've really needed him. So Arch Manning right now, to me, seems like the most complete player at the position. That is the most premium position in football. And obviously when you add in and bake in everything else, that only makes you feel a little bit better about him. But trust me, he had to win this. He has to win this as he continues to progress throughout his senior season. I think he's done that. And Drew, we're going to talk a little bit later in the show how deep and talented this quarterback class is. But, you know, you look at the top 10, some of the changes made in the top 10 in the most recent Top 247 update. Drew, not a lot of changes up top. Dante Moore currently committed to Oregon out of Martin Luther King in Detroit. He stays at number 2. Nico Iamaleava, arguably the most talented passer in the class, stays pat at number 3. He's committed to Josh Heupel in the Tennessee Volunteers. And then Malachi Nelson, who's had an outstanding season at Los Alamitos, been the crown jewel of Lincoln Riley's class for some time now. So this class about 9 deep, 9 quarterbacks in the top 100. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But Drew, I want to talk about another guy that is not mentioned in the top 10, and in my opinion should have been a top 10 player. And I think there's a lot of conversation and dialogue surrounding him. But that's Jackson Arnold, and a guy that we really like, committed to Oklahoma, the Elite 11 MVP, undefeated on the season right now. And Drew, me and you had an exposure to him. I think there's a really good conversation over the summer at the Future 50 in Bradenton. But to me, Jackson Arnold is a day one plug-and-play player. We've seen that over the last 2 seasons, 6A competition in Texas, quick release, accurate with the football, has the most command to me out of any of the quarterback prospects in the country. Athletic, can get it done with his feet, but very comfortable outside of the pocket as well as a passer. And we talked about Oklahoma, Dillon Gabriel, only 1 year of eligibility left. I would not be surprised if Jackson Arnold really kind of rattles the tree next season once he gets to Norman, and all of a sudden we got a little bit of a competition between Dillon Gabriel and Jackson Arnold.
Oh, it's funny. You know, Cade Klubnik, he was the freshman quarterback we thought we would see early on in the 2023 season, but he hasn't really been given a chance, you know. But maybe if you're Clemson, him coming in and pushing DJU is exactly what they needed. No, Jackson Arnold, Cooper, again, I think everyone talks about the scouting process and getting into the nitty gritty. I mean, that's why we call it a process, right? I get my first live exposure to Jackson Arnold at the Future 50. And let's be real, he struggled in that 7-on-7 environment. But that's why you watch the senior tape. That's why you track players for more than just one exposure point. And I think what he's done as a senior is very impressive. Talking big picture, I mean, with Nick Evers there, another Elite 11 finalist already on campus, what happens with him? It was a big win for Oklahoma. So, things aren't great for the Sooners right now, but the future of the quarterback room looks pretty bright.
Elite quarterback class. We'll talk about that. Like I said, a little bit more. But Drew, also within the top 10, a little bit of a shakeup between offensive linemen. At the top, Kadyn Proctor still holding that position. The in-state prospect committed to Iowa. A lot to love about him. But Francis Mauigoa, a guy that you are very familiar with, Drew, and a guy both of us got to see over the summer pushing Kadyn Proctor for that number 1 offensive lineman spot in the country, as both those guys are ranked 7 and 8 consecutively. Drew, what are your thoughts on the number 1 offensive lineman race we got cooking right now?
Well, all three of the guys in that graphic right there are members of my freaks list. Kadyn Proctor went a little viral when I found some old clip of him pushing F-150 across a parking lot. I wanted to ask you, Cooper, I wrote this down. I mean, you were at Oregon under Mario Cristobal. It seems like Francis Mauigoa might have a runway to get on the field a little bit more than Kadyn Proctor, who is going to a developmental program in Iowa. And now Iowa, we know they need some help on the offensive side of the ball. Too bad Kadyn Proctor can't play quarterback or catch a pass. But Mauigoa, I think he's kind of a plug-and-play guy. And from what we've seen of Mario Cristobal, Alex Mirabal at Miami right now, I mean, they are juggling through linemen, playing a ton of different bodies. I think this is a tight battle, and I think it's going to be decided, honestly, in those all-star weeks when we get Kadyn Proctor. Is he going to play in San Antonio at the All-American Bowl? And then Francis Mauigoa, he's expected to be in Orlando. Interested to see how he stacks up to some of these offensive line performances we've seen in the past. Remember last year, Kelvin Banks, who's now starting for Texas, he looked excellent in Orlando during that all-star event.
I completely agree with the sentiment that Francis Mauigoa is going to be ready to play at the next level. I think he's going to be a plug-and-play guy, not only for Mario Cristobal on that offensive line. I think you'll see him at the left tackle position particularly. I think that's kind of what set the ceiling for Francis Mauigoa in the past. We got to see him in Bradenton. He answered all those questions. So a former two-way athlete. Drew, you like to talk about his volleyball background a lot, but he is a dancing bear at the tackle spot. He played opposite of Tyler Booker, the Alabama signee, and a highly touted freshman for the Alabama Crimson Tide. And this is a guy who played most of his ball at right tackle. A.J. Duffy, the Florida State quarterback, now freshman for Mike Norvell. It was a strong running game then. So in terms of the exposure that we had of Francis Mauigoa in pass protection, there were more questions than answers there. But getting to see him live and in person going up against elite competition over the summer, Francis Mauigoa is arguably the best player there. So I expect Mario Cristobal, similar to how he did with Penei Sewell, when you have a rare transcendent talent like one of these guys, I expect those guys to be on the field early. So a lot to like if you're a Miami fan, a lot to be excited about with Francis Mauigoa. But Drew, a lot going on in the top 32, a lot of shifting going on in the top 100. So now it's time to address some of those moves, and let's stick with the offensive line. That is Javen Williams, Penn State commit, an in-state prospect from the state of Pennsylvania, one of the best prospects in the fold for James Franklin and company. He moves up 20 spots into the top 32. He moves up to the number 24 player in the country right now, listed as an offensive tackle at 6'4", 270 pounds, but has played a lot this year at both the right and left guard spot. Drew, I love this kid, an elite track and field background in the shot and discus. This is somebody that we have continued to warm up to throughout the process, but when you watch this kid, it's just hard to teach some of the things that he has in his arsenal.
He's a mauler up front and another member of the freaks list. If you're noticing a theme here, a lot of these guys have that freak qualities, as I'll call them, almost a 67-foot throw in shot put. I mean, he's explosive. I think he's kind of a swing lineman. And how big of a priority is he for Penn State? Well, James Franklin on the road last week on the bye week, he goes and he sees Javen play in person. To me, the big takeaway with him, and for people that aren't familiar, our top 32, we're going to have 32 5-stars at the end of the cycle. That's to reflect 32 first-round NFL draft picks. We're being a little conservative right now. I want to see some of these guys in an all-star setting against their peers, but I think Javen absolutely will probably finish with that 5th star next to his name just based on what he has put on tape over the past few weeks. I mean, he gets out there, he's a pancake machine, and I think if you're Drew Aller, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, you got to be smiling when you turn on that kid's highlight tape. So this is a great get for Penn State, and I think, guy that had to rise as soon as anyone that watched the tape said that we got to move him up, and he did.
Credit to James Franklin as they continue to stack talent at a premium position. So last year, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen at the running back position, they get the best quarterback in the country, and Drew Aller. Some of the guys that we have added to the top 247, and Carmelo Taylor in this most recent update. So James Franklin doing a really good job building that roster in Happy Valley. So you got to be happy there if you're a Penn State fan. But Drew, let's go to another guy that you're pretty familiar with and a guy that you've been banging the table for a while. That is top 247 and now in 5-star territory, but that is edge Damon Wilson, and a guy that's made a lot of noise. Drew, I love this kid. You were the one who kind of opened my eyes to him, but tell us why. I believe another guy on your freaks list, now in the top 32, up 13 spots, sitting at number 26 in the top 247.
Is the entire freaks list going to be in that 32? No, he's explosive. He's got the juice. He can bend. He's got some ankle flexion. You're seeing it in these clips. I think a lot of people don't realize how important ankle flexion is, the ability to dip and get low around a would-be blocker. Damon is one of the best in the class. I think he's really progressed and elevated his game from his junior season into that spring game and then here as a senior. Now his season has been derailed a little bit by Hurricane Ian. I think Venice is going to play here, I think next week or the following week, but he's had a ton of pressure. He looked the part against IMG Academy. I know, Cooper, me and you did a deep breakdown on that game. He got Francis Mauigoa a few different times. And I'm going to give you some juice after dark here, or juice after my juice segment. I think Georgia is in a very good spot for Damon Wilson right now. He was just there in Athens on his official visit, talking to one source kind of with knowledge of the situation. Bulldogs feeling good there. I think Ohio State's another one you got to watch, but would not be surprised if Damon Wilson ended up wearing that, red and black at some point down the line.
Just couldn't help yourself there with the juice segment, but I love it. And trust me, if you're a Georgia fan, go on and watch Damon Wilson's tape. You will have a field day with this one. 6'4", 230 pounds. Drew, you didn't even mention the 10-3 broad that he has there with, at his size, playing the position that he does is pretty rare. But to me, when you watch Damon Wilson, one thing really stands out: an explosive first step and his ability to go speed to power. I think he has some of the heaviest hands in this cycle, even between an edge rusher and a defensive lineman. His ability to move people, play through people. I think day one, you're going to see a guy that's going to be able to rush the passer effectively because of his ability to play through opposing offensive linemen. So a lot to love with Damon Wilson, and certainly a guy we've had our eyes on. And Drew, I think there is certainly a correlation when push comes to shove. You mentioned, and we kind of laugh about it, but this freaks list, a lot of these guys within the top 32 who are trending in the right direction, when they have these physical traits, it makes them more difficult to shy away from, and you feel a lot more comfortable slotting these guys within that first round range.
We've got verified data points. I mean, if you're going to invest in someone, you want to know what they're capable of doing. With Damon Wilson, you even mentioned the weightlifting numbers. I mean, 360-pound bench press, back squats over 400 pounds, close to 500 pounds. I mean, no, he's a freak. He can jump, put his chin on the rim. And Coop, the last guy I think we're talking about that moved into that 32 range is Anthony Hill. He's someone that wasn't on my freaks list, and then I kind of dig more into him, and I'm like, man, I should have had him in there, Anthony Hill. And Texas A&M, that defense, the rich are getting richer, especially in that front seven with Anthony Hill. Gabe Brooks actually texted me about him and was bringing him up. And Cooper, I told you this, I put on the tape, I see a little Christian Harris in his game, who's the linebacker out of Alabama that got selected, I think it was round 3 by the New England Patriots. I mean, this is a guy you can leave on the field and just make plays.
Yeah, for me, it was another guy out of Denton Ryan in Texas, an alumni there that he reminded me of, and that's Drew Sanders. Drew Sanders, obviously a guy 6'4.5", a rare in terms of his height, weight, speed combination at the linebacker position. But in terms of the utility, being able to play off ball, sideline to sideline, certainly in passing down situations, being able to use his ability as a pass rusher off the edge, I think that's what differentiates Anthony Hill. To me, there were some questions on how much upside and potential athletically he had left, in his development. I think he's answered all of that this year, and this certainly looks like a guy, not only between his versatility, but what's between the ears as well. Excellent key and diagnose ability and instincts at the linebacker position. I think he's going to be able to see the field early for DJ Durkin in College Station. And Drew, we mentioned last show on Monday how many freshmen that Jimbo Fisher is very comfortable playing. That defensive line has a chance to be very special there in College Station. Now, if you add some of these front seven elements and a guy like Anthony Hill at the second level, there's no telling what that defense can materialize to be in a couple years. But Drew, outside of the top 32, those are guys now within the 5-star range. So as we move and progress towards early signing day, these are the guys right now that are within 5-star range. But we had a lot of movers outside of the top 32. And one of those guys that was probably the biggest mover for us, I'm going to have to go back and double check that, but Daevin Hobbs out of North Carolina, top 247 defensive lineman, a 3-sport athlete, a guy who's averaged over 14 points on the hardwood. And Drew, we knew this guy had a lot of potential. I think the senior film kind of left us with our jaws on the ground a little bit in terms of his development, how much he is, how soon he is acclimated to the game of football. But certainly a guy, to me, Drew, right now as we're having this conversation, I would not be shocked if this is another guy who's got a pretty good chance to move into that 5-star conversation at the end of the day.
Right, and I don't know if producer Jesse's got the clips, but there's some of them out there of Hobbs playing offense, and he's catching the ball and running away from people with his 4.7 speed. Hobbs wasn't a camp kid, but you kind of, reach out to some college contacts, get some more contextual data. He's got 35-inch arms, an 82-inch wingspan, 4.4 in the short shuttle, and more impressively, a 38-inch vertical jump. The best of the best want this kid. Tennessee's in there. Alabama's in there. Georgia's in there. I think Georgia might be pushing the hardest. He was recently at Michigan, Ohio State also for visits. So not only is he someone that has a chance to finish inside that 32, I think he's going to be a big talking point for us over the next few months leading up to the early signing period. And I think for our good friend Steve Wiltfong, the director of recruiting at 24/7 Sports, where does he end up? Because he might be someone that could see the field as a freshman and by year 2 is an impact starter wherever he lands.
Daevin Hobbs, certainly a guy to keep an eye on moving up the board for us. But Drew, I'm going to tee you up right here. I'm going to let you take this one because I think this is one of the guys that you had circled within the top 247, what we've seen this year. And you got quite the, I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but quite the comparison. At least his name is going to be echoed in the same sentence. But that is top 247 tight end Lawson Luckie, moving up more than 70 spots, committed to the University of Georgia, in-state product. And Drew, the guy that you compare him to, I'm going to let you take it away.
Well, we're getting a little aggressive here, but I call Lawson Luckie, and I know I saw this in Coop's Corner. He's like Brock Bowers light, all right? He might not be as explosive. He might not be as big. He might be not as nasty of a blocker. But if you're looking for a tight end in the class of 2023 that resembles Brock Bowers, it's Lawson Luckie. And the kid's committed to UGA. He took an end around, I think, 53 yards for a touchdown this season. He's got over 280 yards receiving. He's an H-back. He can do a little bit of everything. You can move him around, split him out wide. To me, not surprising, our guy Todd Hartley has this kid committed, and I think he's going to be a weapon and continue to be a big part of that UGA offense, which is leaning so heavily on that tight end room. But there's a lot to like about Brock Bowers light.
I wrote last week in Coop's Corner, if you're trying to justify his value through the stat sheet, then you're making a mistake. This is a guy, I think his value is in his utility, the same way it is with Brock Bowers. Yeah, Brock Bowers is one of the better pass catchers in the country, if not the best pass catcher in the country at the tight end position. But you kind of have a little bit of a tweener frame. But when you have a tight end like that can attach, detach, be another guy that you have to account for in the passing game, that makes it extremely difficult to defend, especially when you're talking about a Todd Monken offense that is extremely balanced offensively. So I love this get for Georgia. I love this get for tight ends coach Todd Hartley, who continues to do an excellent job there. That's not even mentioning Pierce Sperlin. The Dogs are still after one of the best tight ends in the country, and Deuce Robinson as well out of Pinnacle in Arizona. So Lawson Luckie certainly going to be a positive asset for the Georgia Bulldogs. But Drew, we're going to end this with another H-back type, and this is Kenyon Sadiq, committed to the Oregon Ducks and to the Danimal up there in Eugene, Oregon. But Drew, another guy, just a physically imposing player. You start looking at the traits here, 6'3" and change, 230 pounds, a guy that ran a 11:04 in the 100-meter this spring. You can do so many different things with a Kenyon Sadiq, that type of skill set, and a guy that's pretty similar to Lawson Luckie, but I think offers a little bit more upside in the passing game as a receiver. And Drew, I think this is a guy that Dan Lanning, Kenny Dillingham, the offensive coordinator in Oregon, can get on the field early because of the mismatch type of presence that he presents. I love Kenyon Sadiq. He moved up big time for us, a guy now into the top 100. And I wouldn't be surprised if he keeps moving up the board for us throughout the rest of the year.
Coop, absolutely, I agree. I think this is a modern spread attack type of tight end, a guy you can put in the slot, a guy you can motion around, get him into mismatches. And I got to give a shout out here to Tracking Football, those guys. Kenyon Sadiq, the first time I heard his name was 11 months ago. They posted his stuff. He's there in Idaho, right? And they had his track and field data, and they compared him. They said if he was in Florida, he would have the same offers as anyone down there. He would have 13 of them, but he was tucked up their way. Took a while for people to find him, and now he's there. And Cooper, the state of Idaho does not produce a ton of NFL talent, but I will say one guy that is from the state of Idaho, Taysom Hill, right? I'm not saying Sadiq is Taysom Hill, but I think he's kind of a gadget weapon, a guy you can do different things with. You know, you apply that mindset from the NFL to the college game, use him in the slot, move him around, makes a ton of sense that we're moving up. Natural pass catcher, and I think he's only going to get bigger, add some body armor, and that's going to allow him to chip some defensive ends on Saturdays there in the Pac-12.
Yeah, I tell you this, if you work in a recruiting department out west, you're in that Pac-12 Mountain West footprint, you better make sure you do your due diligence in Idaho. You bring up Taysom Hill, Kyle Vander Esch, another guy that played 8-man football at some point. He's running wild for the Dallas Cowboys right now. But Drew, let's transition to another segment. Before we do that, another reminder, make sure you subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, like, comment, all of that. Will do us well in the long run. But Drew, let's get to it. New names in the top 247, and this is a guy out of the state of Georgia, Drew, that I think the more me and you watched him, it was just going to be impossible to keep him off the list. But that is LSU top 247 linebacker commit Whit Weeks.
Yeah, and his brother is playing a lot more and more for the Tigers. Cooper, I know you were in Baton Rouge for that game against Tennessee the other day. No, what I love about Whit Weeks is what he's doing on offense. He's got a bunch of long runs. If you turn on the huddle for him this season, I think he's a guy that can play in space, can cover running backs out of the backfield. I think this is a great take for Brian Kelly. It seems like a Brian Kelly type of defender. I mean, Dad went to Georgia, played there. Nice get for LSU, nice little find. And we talk about off-ball linebackers. This is what we're looking for, guys getting multiple snaps, and more importantly, guys that can get sideline to sideline. Whit Weeks can do just that.
A three-phase player there in the state of Georgia. And you mentioned it, his dad, he's a legacy. Dad played at the University of Georgia. This was a player that Georgia was very fond of, but outside of a cycle where they have Raylan Wilson, C.J. Allen, and Troy Bowles in the boat, Whit Weeks is probably going to end up at the University of Georgia. So a really big gift for Brian Kelly and company. Matt House, a defensive coordinator, overseeing the linebacker position. Drew, I'm going to go with another legacy. This is Will Smith Jr. out of the state of Ohio, committed to Ohio State in the Buckeyes. And I'll tell you what, I grew up in New Orleans. I remember when his dad was a first-round draft pick of the New Orleans Saints, a member of the New Orleans Saints Hall of Fame. And the game is pretty similar. It's pretty crazy watching these two guys on tape and kind of seeing the contrast of the play style of how they play. But a guy that you could play at the 5 technique and a 4 down front, I think he can move inside if needed as a 3 technique. But very good first step off the line of scrimmage. Sudden, uses his hands well, plays very strong at the point of attack, and a guy that's very disruptive. And I also love his versatility. So Will Smith Jr., certainly a guy that's moved up the board for us. I think he's only scratching the surface of what his physical development is going to be. You put him in a place like Columbus, the track record they have in their strength and conditioning department, I would not be surprised if Will Smith Jr. is one of those guys we look back a couple years from now and we say, wow, I wish we would have had him a little bit higher. But that's certainly a guy for me, Drew, that has stood out throughout the process.
And he's going to play for one of the best in Larry Johnson. Another for me, this guy, Nathan Leacock, wide receiver out of North Carolina. He's committed to Tennessee, part of that class that's sitting number 9 right now. Obviously, they have a big game this weekend against Alabama. This is a kid who's averaging over 25 yards a catch. And Coop, I think it was the UT message board. They kind of asked for our opinion on him. You turn on the tape and you're like, wow, how do we not have Leacock a little bit higher in the rankings? I mean, his non-conference highlights are 9 minutes long on Huddle. You turn them off, you can't stop watching them. So I think he's a guy that's going to be able to eat in that Josh Heupel offense, which is all about speed and tempo. Love him, sub-11 kid. You know, during the Under Armour All-America camp in Atlanta, I didn't really know who he was. And then you go back and you watch it again, and he was an easy addition to the top 247, someone, again, that I think is a perfect fit for that offense, which is all about speed.
There is absolutely no way we can get beat in the rankings process with a Tennessee receiver. I think that happened last year with Squirrel White. I can't let that happen again. ATL Vol, shout out to him. He's the one that turned us on to Nathan Leacock. So certainly a guy that we like. Drew, the sub 1100 meter, he's done that multiple times. I think this is a guy that fits naturally in Josh Heupel's very open passing attack, and I would not be surprised that speed element should be able to let him factor in early at the next level in Knoxville. But Drew, I'm going to stick at the receiver position, a guy that you're very familiar with. That's Wake Forest commit, top 247 receiver. Now that is Micah Mays, a guy that we recently bumped up to 4-star status. And Drew, you mentioned it a couple weeks ago on this show. He's got more than half of the ACC pursuing him now, but a guy that's got an excellent track and field background. I think at one point a two-way player. I love his versatility. I think he can play inside out, does a really good job of high-pointing the football. Love his change of direction, his short area quickness. I think this is going to be a guy that's going to continue to develop at the next level, and I really like where he's heading in his development.
Yeah, I think Wake Forest is kind of the perfect fit. You know, they have compared him to A.T. Perry, one of the ACC's best wide receivers, and I think Mays can do similar things to him. And he's a big outside target, but he can create separation, and he's shifty. You mentioned Micah Mays, that track background, state champ in the 400-meter dash, state champ in the triple jump. State qualifier in the high jump. We'll see if Wake Forest can hold on to him, because he is certainly a talented guy and a guy that can stretch the field. And lots of schools like Miami are looking for someone that can do that. I'm going to finish this up, Cooper, with one more ACC commit. Kenny Minchey, the quarterback commit that they have. He moves into the top 247 for us. He's the guy that was in the Elite 11 finals. You know, Pittsburgh, I think they kind of know what they want to do under Pat Narduzzi at quarterback. The thing that stands out to me about Minchey is, number one, the touch on his deep balls. You turn on the tape, he's very accurate. And he's also got a big frame. His frame kind of reminds me of DJU, and I think we kind of sometimes overthink that, the ability to take hits. The ACC might not be the SEC, but there are some talented defensive lines out there, some guys that can get after the quarterback, i.e. Clemson. And if you're going to beat them, you need a quarterback that can stay in the game. So Kenny Minchey, I like him a lot. And just like with Micah Mays, are other schools going to try to get involved in this recruitment? Notre Dame offered a while ago. We know they still need a quarterback in the 2023 cycle. So someone to keep an eye on. I know Steve Wiltfong, the director of recruiting, he really likes him. I think there are some others on our team that do as well.
Minchey's missed some time this year with a lower extremity injury. He's expected back a little bit later in the season, hopefully back for the playoffs there in the state of Tennessee. But when you hear people talk about Kenny Minchey, it's kind of his cerebralness and the intangibles at the quarterback position. And then I think he really surprised some people at the Elite 11 finals. So you talk about Pitt, you talk about the fit there. Obviously, Kenny Pickett, the only quarterback taken in the first round of this last year's NFL draft. I love the fit for Kenny Minchey there. We'll see what happens. I expect more teams to knock on his door, as there are some quarterback needy teams still there. But Drew, I'm going to end this in the trenches with another newcomer in the Pac-12 footprint, and that is Micah Banuelos. This is a guy, since a national recruiting analyst, Brandon Huffman, has turned us on to him, that I've really taken a liking to at Kennedy Catholic up there in the state of Washington, and a really good get for Lincoln Riley. I like what they're doing on the offensive line. This is a guy that plays some tackle, plays some guard. I think he is such a natural fit at the center position at the next level. And I think this is going to be a guy, it would not shock me if he starts 3+ years at USC I love his feet, very calm at the point of attack, very patient, very steady with his hands, plays the game the right way. So I really like this kid for USC and Lincoln Riley. And if you're going to build a college football playoff contender, you got to get it right in the trenches. These are the guys that you have to get on. So we've seen Lincoln Riley already, a guy like Micah Banuelos, Elijah Page, who they flipped from Notre Dame. I think they got the right mindset out there for how they want to attack the offensive side of the line of scrimmage for Lincoln Riley and co. But Drew, now we get on to another point in the segment that I think is very enjoyable for us, but potential 5 stars, a name outside of the top 32 right now that if you had to bet on, this would be the guy that you would say, all right, this guy's probably going to be pretty hard to keep out. And the guy that you got, I have to say, I have to agree with you. The physical traits and the athletic upside and just the potential alone, too hard to doubt. But that is PJ Adebawore, committed to Oklahoma out of the state of Missouri. Tell us why you like him.
Yeah, Mr. PB&J. I said it on the show back when we were talking about Oklahoma. This guy used to eat 6 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches a day just to put on some weight because his frame is so lengthy. He's got an 85-inch wingspan, is 7'3" in the L drill, 4'8" in the 40-yard dash. You know, he's dealing with a little bit of injury right now. Still hasn't played a ton as a senior. I think that could be one thing that might hold him back when we ultimately sit down and hammer out these final 32. But we're going to have a chance to see him in an all-star game. We really liked him at the Under Armour Future of 50 event. Everyone says, oh, you guys dictate things too much about camps. But it's like, no, we watch the film. Then these guys are all alongside their peers, and it makes it much easier to stack them. So PJ, Mr. PB&J Adebawore, I think is a guy that can finish this cycle with 5 stars next to his name.
He's got a 7-foot wingspan. This is a guy certainly still developing physically. He ran a 4.77. He had a good shuttle time. I thought in limited snaps he showed enough. This is a guy with a big up arrow. I think he's going to take another step once he gets to Norman, Oklahoma with Brent Venables. And we talked about Brent Venables and the key for him going forward. He's got to be able to hang on to guys like PJ Adebawore. Drew, I'm going to stay on the front 7. I'm going to go with Deshaun Womack, and I'm going to go back to that future 50 because, like Francis Mauigoa, on the defensive side, Deshaun Womack was one of the best players in attendance, and we really liked the tape coming into that event. But leaving that event in Bradenton, that was an eye-opener for us. This was a guy that appears physically ready to make an impact day one at the next level, and they need him, a playmaker on the defensive front in Baton Rouge. So Jamar Cain doing a really good job there, LSU defensive line coach. But this is a guy that can play outside in, certainly comfortable on the edge as a pass rushing presence. I would not be surprised if he moves inside, but a really good first step, very sudden. Love his quickness, loves his motor, runs hot. I love Deshaun Womack, Drew. And this is another guy right now sitting in a spot where he is number 35 in the ranking. So he's right there on the door, knocking on the door of 5-star status. But there you have it, PJ Adebawore, Deshaun Womack, and Drew. It's typically those guys with those physical traits who are starting to come into their own that we see at premium positions, whether that's on the offense or defensive side of the line of scrimmage, or at the cornerback position with these physical traits that are really hard to find, but that we see guys with these higher upsides and that can make a jump at the next level.
Right. I mean, watch the NFL draft. What goes early, right? Your quarterbacks, guys that can get after the quarterback, guys that can protect the quarterback. Those are the premium positions. So we're going to try to model our rankings exactly after that. I mean, I wanted to talk about it a few weeks ago. The Jacksonville Jaguars, yeah, they've kind of trailed down a little bit, but look how they've built that defensive unit. I mean, they've used a ton of draft capital on the defensive front. Everyone questioned them taking Trayvon Walker, and I think it's going to pay off for them long term. They've hit at linebacker as well. So building out that front 7 is super important. That's why we're always looking at these guys to potentially move up in the rankings, normally the defensive linemen. And I think the 2023 class in general is pretty special.
All right, Drew, we're going to have a lot of VOD material as we still got some time to go here. But I kind of like this segment we got coming up. We said before we came on the show, we each wanted to pick a player ranked number 180 through 247, which would essentially be around 6 and 7 of the NFL draft. One player that we feel confident that could outperform their current grade projection. And Drew, You went to the West Coast, surprising. You surprised a lot of people there, but you're going with the Arizona product, currently committed to USC, and a guy that's got a lot of fans behind the scenes. That's top 247 receiver Jacoby Lane.
Yeah, he's someone that we've talked about, I think, every update about moving in, and we've had so much exposure to him. He was at Battle Miami last January. We saw him at OT7 make another big standout performance there. I mean, this is a guy that can go up and get the football. I don't think it's a question about talent with Jacoby Lane. I think there's some off-field question marks with him. You know, how focused is he maybe in life outside of football? That's the one thing that's hesitant about being all in on Jacoby Lane for us. But that being said, I mean, this is a guy that's going to Lincoln Riley's offense. He's going to play potentially with Malachi Nelson, and he's going to play alongside some other good wide receivers that are already there in Los Angeles. I think he's someone that you're going to turn on that Pac-12 after dark, or I guess I should say Big Ten after dark, and he's going to be making plays, running past defensive backs, natural pass catcher, guy that can elevate, go over cornerbacks and safeties and make plays. I'm a huge fan of Jacoby Lane, and hopefully it all pans out because he is a legitimate blue chip talent and probably a top 100 talent if we're being honest.
I think you said it, Drew. Just when you talk about the fit, I love the fit at USC in Los Angeles under the roof of Lincoln Riley. You got a guy like Caleb Williams, also Malachi Nelson waiting in the wings there. That receiver room as well. We've seen those guys taking off. Jordan Addison, Mario Williams, immensely talented. But Drew, I'm going to go back down south, and I'm going to go to the defensive line. I'm going to go with Kadyn McDonald, a guy right inside our top 247 from North Gwinnett. No shortage of suitors for Kadyn McDonald, a guy 6'3", 310 pounds, and he can play multiple positions in either a 4-man or a 3-down front. And that's kind of really what I like about him. But the first step is explosive, and for his size, he's very nimble. And then that ability, that weight, and that lead in his hands, I think he is a very forceful player at the point of attack. I like Kadyn McDonald. This was a guy that I vouched for to be higher in the rankings, but I think somebody's going to get a steal with Kadyn McDonald late in the process. I love this kid. I love what he brings to the table. It's pretty crazy, and it's a little bit illuminating when you see a guy like that get some offensive snaps as well and a little bit of a wild cat package for Kadyn McDonald. So we'll keep an eye on him. But Drew, it's debate time, and here we go, man. We're getting into it, the artificial debate, and we're going to start with top 247 defensive lineman John Walker. And I think a guy that, Drew, me and you have talked about a lot. We talked about him at the beginning of the show, currently committed to Gus Malzahn in Central Florida. And Drew, I'll let you lead off with your take.
Well, I've had some questions about him, and it's great that we threw him on here because I just got live exposure to John Walker. I saw him on Monday night. He's a legit two-gapper. My big question with him is his effort kind of in between plays, but I think when he's on, he is on. He is one of the best noses in the class of 2023, Cooper. And I know me and you, we keep going back and forth about where he should be slotted. I'm more of a fan than I was before. I think DJ Dale is a good comparison. I had an SEC contact reach out to me and say that they see some of that. Once you get him on a snap count in a strength program, maybe he becomes more of a monster. But the effort, I think that's the one question for me right now with John Walker, the effort. But there are a lot of things to like, and I saw some of that on Monday night in his game against Orlando Jones. I think he had 2 or 3 sacks. So not as much of a debate as there once was, because I know, Cooper, that's like your guy. You're the president of his fan club.
That's my guy, man. I'm a John Walker guy, have been. And it's kind of funny, the things that you look for in a player. And I know there are maybe some drawbacks or hesitations on your end, and rightfully so. But I remember seeing him in Miami in February at the Under Armour Combine. This was a guy that kind of got into it a little bit with an opposing offensive lineman, carries himself like he's got some dog in him. Now, you got to channel that the right way, but I like that. I'd rather not have to coach that up. I'd rather have to coach that down. So I like that edge that John Walker plays with. I think he's got some fire. That's reflected in his tape as well. You mentioned him as a two-gapper, and I think that's right. A guy that's going to play nose, but a guy that plays so strong at the point of attack. He is really hard to move for opposing offensive linemen, plays with a lot of power in his hands. I keep mentioning that, but guys his size, 300 pounds, that can move laterally the way that he does, the type of athlete that he is, I like that a lot. You mentioned the Clay, him getting in a potential a Power 5 weight room with Central Florida moving to the Big 12. I like the ceiling for this player, and I like the edge that he plays with. And if he ends up at a place like Central Florida, I think he's going to be a day one impact-ready player for Gus Malzahn. But Drew, let's stay in the state of Florida. And to me, this is another conversation that's a really good, more of a philosophical conversation in terms of the talent acquisition. But Brandon Inniss, who you're very familiar with, the number 19 player in the country, one of the top receivers in the country, versus a guy like Jakeem Williams, the number 30 player in the country, who you're also very familiar with. Drew, you've had more exposure to both of these guys than anybody probably in the industry. I think that's fair to say. You covering the state of Florida, to me, this comes down to the ceiling type of argument, not which one possesses the highest ceiling, but which one do you feel a little bit more convicted on that you're going to get the best return on investment with?
Well, we talked about betting, right? If I was a betting man, return on investment's a great term to use right there. I think I'm going to go with Brandon Inniss, and I think it's the football temperament factor with him. I mean, this is a kid, and I always say it, and I'm sure people are tired of me saying it. He hates to lose, right? He is a leader. He is an alpha. 2 weeks ago, saw him in a rivalry game against Cardinal Gibbons High School. He goes in at safety. Well, he picks off a pass right away, forces a fumble. To me, the obvious comp, and it's one we've used throughout the process with him, is Amon-Ra St. Brown. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, he is a kid who was selected in the 4th round of the NFL draft. He can tell you every wide receiver that was selected ahead of him that year. He made headlines a few weeks ago for that. I think Brandon Inniss comes from that same mindset. He wants to be the best. I think the floor is super high for him. The ceiling might not be the highest. He might not run the fastest. He might not be the biggest. But, man, that's a guy that's going to fight for me. And on the flip side, I like Jakeem Williams. I love the athletic traits. We mentioned the freaks list. He's a guy that we have ranked super high. He's twitched up. He's got a massive frame, the basketball background, the swimming background. I just still wonder, long term, what he's going to look like. Is he going to get there at Florida State or wherever he signs, and is he going to excel, or is he going to face some adversity and kind of shell up? I think that's the one question mark I have, and I love the program he came from, Stranahan, but still something that I wonder about. And then with Inniss, I just think he's ready-made and ready to go. What about you, Cooper?
I'm not going to argue on Brandon Inniss, because this is a guy, Drew, you said it, he hates to lose more than he loves to win. And I think this is somebody, Brandon Inniss, and Amon-Ra St. Brown has been the name that we've brought up consistently throughout the process in terms of the comp with Brandon Inniss. And Amon-Ra St. Brown was obviously a very highly touted recruit coming out of Mater Dei in California, went to USC under Clay Helton. I don't think was in the best situation to succeed. His draft stock kind of plummets because of that. He ends up getting drafted in the 4th round. And that's arguably a guy that you could say was more of a top 40 type of talent. And Brandon Inniss, I kind of feel that same way. I feel like 19 is the highest best case scenario for a player like Brandon Inniss to be drafted in the NFL, where I think a guy like Jakeem Williams, or yes, he's not as polished of a product. I mean, you look at the frame, a guy there is 6'3", 200 pounds plus, 3-sport athlete, like you mentioned, touch 22 plus on the GPS, a guy that averaged double-digit rebounds. And you start looking at the multi-sport participation, the production, obviously the speed, the frame, the explosiveness, what he can offer, the catch radius. Yes, obviously there's a lot more that meets the eye to a guy like Jakeem Williams. He has to realize that full potential in a place like Florida State. Mike Norvell has to put him in the best position to succeed, which I think is a fair question. Obviously, we've seen guys like Johnny Wilson who have progressed, Micah Pittman who has found new life coming over from Oregon. So there are positive signs there for his future in Tallahassee. To me, this is a calculated risk on a guy that I think has all pro potential. It wasn't a mistake when I compared him to Julio Jones. And sometimes I hate these comparisons, but a guy like that with his physique, his type of potential, Julio Jones was kind of in the same boat, and then he matured and he developed, but he went to the best possible situation he could have gone to under Nick Saban at Alabama. To me, that's a little bit more wait and see. But this one is a great conversation. I think it's more philosophical. And Drew, I think 9 times out of 10, I think you would agree with me on taking the potential more than the floor. But a guy like Brandon Inniss, and I wrote this last week in Coop's Corner, is incredibly hard to bet against.
Oh, he is, and maybe I'm too close to it. But if I'm drafting, I'm in the room. He's a red star prospect for me, Brandon Ennis, a guy I can't miss, a guy that if I need to change the culture in my locker room, I need guys that are going to get the most out of their teammates. I think that's the X factor with Brandon Ennis. I've written that in the past, so that's why I lean Brandon Ennis. Still like Jakeem Williams. They're two talented wide receivers. It's crazy to think about. They're both on the same 7-on-7 team, the South Florida Express. Don't think you can go wrong with either one. I'm a big believer in Brandon and everything he represents.
Well, you're a smart man, Drew. Probably one of the reasons I'm working in media right now and not in college football anymore. But Drew, let's get to our 2-minute segment. And in the tinfoil hat, let's put it back on. But a big game this week in College Game Day, going back to Knoxville for the second time this season as Tennessee hosts Alabama. The status of Bryce Young still up in the air. Jalen Milroe looking to get some more run. Ty Simpson, the former 5-star freshman, getting some first-team reps this week in Tuscaloosa. Drew, what's your take on this game?
I want to know what happens if Tennessee wins, right? They take down the giant that is Nick Saban. What does that do for them on the recruiting trail? And I go back to the summer months, back in the spring, when Nico Iamaleava committed to the Volunteers, we were all kind of scratching our heads. Oh, wow, Tennessee, they're going to be for real, not only in the NIL landscape, but also under the direction of Josh Heupel. Well, now they're undefeated. Now College Game Day's in town. Now they have this huge visitors list. Samuel Mapemba, he's going to be on campus for an official visit. But if they take down Alabama, you got to think they're a favorite to make it to Atlanta in that SEC championship game. They're going to be in the college football playoff conversation. And I think that could allow them to make a run at some of these 5-stars that they were previously in on. Francis Mauigoa, a guy we talked about at the beginning of the show, top 10 prospect. Remember when he was posting photos with Nico Iamaleava in Knoxville? You think Josh Heupel, he realizes, hey, we're undefeated. Miami, they're having a little bit of some growing pains in year one under Mario Cristobal. Why would you not kick the tires on him? I think the same thing goes for Carnell Tate, the elite wide receiver. I said this in the past a few weeks ago on this show in this space, that I still think there's some people close to Carnell Tate that like the Volunteers and like what Knoxville has to offer. So that's my big, something that I'm keeping an eye on this weekend. What happens in Tennessee? Because, man, if they take down Alabama, and sure, it might be an Alabama without Bryce Young, but that could do wonders for them on the recruiting trail. Sitting number 9 right now in the class of 2023 rankings. They're also doing an excellent job in the class of 2024, and I think a win over Alabama gives them even more of a bump in that 24 group.
Tennessee is a scary team right now. Listen, I was in Baton Rouge last week and they dominated. Before the time I even got in my seat, Tennessee had just scored on their first possession of the game. So I like what Josh Heupel's doing. You mentioned, Drew, some of the guys that they have coming in this class, dynamic, potential kind of like program changing players. Nico Iamaleava, Cameron Seldon, a guy that we're really, really warming up to, and obviously in the top 32 of the top 247. And then you mentioned 2 other guys. That's potentially 4 players, Francis Mauigoa, Carnell Tate. Even if one of those guys were to get in the boat, I think you have to love that if you're a Tennessee fan. But Drew, I said earlier in the show, I was going to talk about the quarterbacks in this class, and I think this is an elite quarterback class. They're about 9 deep, 9 players in the top 100 at the quarterback position. And really starting with Arch Manning, we detailed him earlier. Dante Moore is about as steady as they come. I think that's going to be a guy that's going to be day one ready right there. Nico Iamaleava, I will say this again, he is the most talented passer in this class. And I think there is a legitimate argument, if you wanted to make it, that he could be the number 1 player when this is all said and done. I really wouldn't argue that with you there too much. And then outside of that, USC, Malachi Nelson, we've talked about him. Jackson Arnold committed to Oklahoma. I think he is the most, if not one of the most day one ready quarterbacks. I think he kind of fits in the same mold of a Dante Moore. But you go outside of that, Drew, who's the guy that we continue to bring up that continues to work up these boards? That's Avery Johnson, committed to Kansas State. So if that's the 9th quarterback in the rankings, I think I think Avery Johnson's number 8. I mean, that's an elite class, right? Because it was only a week ago we came on this show and we talked about how Avery Johnson was a program changer for Kansas State and how he could change the perception of that program. So an elite quarterback class, by all means. I cannot wait to see how these guys shake out. We got 6 quarterbacks in the top 32 right now. Christopher Vazina is the highest ranked quarterback outside of that. And you can make a very good case. He's right here in Birmingham. I've seen enough of him. I think he's a top 32 talent. I think Clemson's super excited to have him. So a very good class. I'm excited 3 to 4 years from now, Drew, to come back, take a look at this class and kind of see how the dominoes fell.
Absolutely. Some difference makers, right? And I'm excited to see them I've said it in the past on the show, what happens when they get to all America games, because that kind of another data point for us, another live exposure, a chance where we can kind of separate and stack these chips. And hopefully some of these guys don't enroll early like Ty Simpson did, where you don't get that chance to see them when the lights come on in San Antonio or Orlando.
All right, Drew, 59 minutes, 2:59 Central Time here. I want to thank producer Jesse for letting us go all in on this Top 247 edition. Also want to thank Gabe Brooks, National Recruiting Analyst, and Chris Singletary as well, in the same position, for all the work that they've done, and everybody else, so regional analysts, a lot of work that goes into this, and we're super fortunate to have the team that we do. So for Andrew Ivins, I am Cooper Petagna. For everything you need on the Top 247, make sure to visit 247sports.com. We'll see you next week on Monday, 3 o'clock Eastern, and we'll see you then.